Still, the choice lay in front of him now like a fork in the trail. He could go public. Upload the data to trending platforms. Drop the files into the hands of creators with massive reach, true crime YouTubers, whistleblower podcasters, investigative journalists who still cared. But what would it cost? He had already lost Emma. She had been found a week later, disoriented and terrified, wandering along a stretch of highway 100 miles from where she vanished. She didn't remember anything, at least, that's what she told the hospital. But Alex saw it in her eyes when he visited. The fear. The silence. She had been shown something, told something, that ensured she would never speak of it again. Whatever they had done to her, it had worked. She was alive, but she wasn't whole. That alone had nearly broken him. And it made him question whether the truth was even worth it. He stared at the USB drive for a long time, feeling the rough metal edges dig into his palm. The files were backed up. He had scattered copies across burner devices and hidden them inside packages mailed to people he trusted just enough to gamble on. But he still held the original in his hand. A piece of evidence so dangerous that men were willing to kill for it, and did. Sarah had disappeared after the cabin burned. Whether she escaped, was silenced by her own people, or had planned the whole ending from the start, Alex didn't know. Daniel's body had never been found. And the men who chased them? They had no names, no files, no records. They were shadows sent to clean up something that should never have been uncovered. Yet somehow, in the quiet of that forgotten ranger station, Alex found something resembling peace. Not the peace that comes from resolution or justice, but the kind that comes from understanding the limits of what one person can do. He had carried the weight of the mystery, the search, the grief, but now, the truth was out there. Maybe not in headlines. Maybe not in viral TikToks or trending hashtags. But in the right hands. In safe hands. And maybe that was enough, for now. Before leaving, Alex wrote a single line in one of the notebooks and placed it carefully atop the pile. The forest sees everything. We just have to keep looking. Then he walked away, not because the story was over, but because his chapter in it was. He didn't know where the road would lead him next. Maybe he'd vanish, just like the others, into a new name, a new life, always looking over his shoulder. Or maybe one day, someone else would follow the trail he left behind and finally burn it all down. But as he disappeared into the trees, the birds slowly returning to song overhead, one final thought anchored him. Some drones never shut off. Some systems are always watching. Still, the choice lay in front of him now like a fork in the trail. He could go public. Upload the data to trending platforms. Drop the files into the hands of creators with massive reach, true crime YouTubers, whistleblower podcasters, investigative journalists who still cared. But what would it cost? He had already lost Emma. She had been found a week later, disoriented and terrified, wandering along a stretch of highway 100 miles from where she vanished. She didn't remember anything, at least, that's what she told the hospital. But Alex saw it in her eyes when he visited. The fear. The silence. She had been shown something, told something, that ensured she would never speak of it again. Whatever they had done to her, it had worked. She was alive, but she wasn't whole. That alone had nearly broken him. And it made him question whether the truth was even worth it. He stared at the USB drive for a long time, feeling the rough metal edges dig into his palm. The files were backed up. He had scattered copies across burner devices and hidden them inside packages mailed to people he trusted just enough to gamble on. But he still held the original in his hand. A piece of evidence so dangerous that men were willing to kill for it, and did. Sarah had disappeared after the cabin burned. Whether she escaped, was silenced by her own people, or had planned the whole ending from the start, Alex didn't know. Daniel's body had never been found. And the men who chased them? They had no names, no files, no records. They were shadows sent to clean up something that should never have been uncovered. Yet somehow, in the quiet of that forgotten ranger station, Alex found something resembling peace. Not the peace that comes from resolution or justice, but the kind that comes from understanding the limits of what one person can do. He had carried the weight of the mystery, the search, the grief, but now, the truth was out there. Maybe not in headlines. Maybe not in viral TikToks or trending hashtags. But in the right hands. In safe hands. And maybe that was enough for now. Before leaving, Alex wrote a single line in one of the notebooks and placed it carefully atop the pile. The forest sees everything. We just have to keep looking. Then he walked away, not because the story was over, but because his chapter in it was. He didn't know where the road would lead him next. Maybe he'd vanish, just like the others, into a new name, a new life, always looking over his shoulder. Or maybe one day, someone else would follow the trail he left behind and finally burn it all down. But as he disappeared into the trees, the birds slowly returning to song overhead, one final thought anchored him. Some drones never shut off. Some systems are always watching. They had spent decades mourning her loss, holding on to the hope that one day she would come back. Now that she was here, they didn't know what to feel. Relief, anger, confusion, it was all a blur. And then there was the question of the child she had cared for. The child who had grown up without her, who had spent years wondering what had happened to the woman who had been like a second mother. How would they react to her return? Would they embrace her, or would the years of separation create a chasm too wide to bridge? As the story unfolded, it became clear that the mystery of the missing babysitter was more complex than anyone had imagined. It wasn't just about a woman who had disappeared, it was about the lives she had touched, the secrets she had kept, and the reasons behind her decision to vanish. The investigation is ongoing, and the answers remain elusive. But one thing is certain, the truth is out there, waiting to be uncovered. And when it is, it will change everything. The revelation that the missing babysitter had been found alive after 25 years sent shockwaves through the community. But as the initial relief began to settle, a new layer of complexity emerged, casting doubt on the circumstances of her disappearance and return. The babysitter, now a woman in her early 40s, had been living under a different name in a neighboring state, leading a life that seemed ordinary at first glance. She had a job, a modest apartment, and even a few friends. Yet, there was an air of secrecy about her, a reluctance to discuss her past that piqued the curiosity of those around her. As investigators delved deeper into her life, they uncovered inconsistencies in her story. She claimed to have been a victim of a traumatic event that forced her into hiding, but the details were vague and contradictory. Her neighbors reported that she had been seen in the area around the time of the original disappearance, raising questions about her true identity and the reasons behind her sudden reappearance. Adding to the mystery was a series of anonymous letters sent to the family, warning them to stop digging into the past. The letters were postmarked from various locations, suggesting that someone was monitoring the investigation from afar. The tone of the letters was menacing, urging the family to let the past remain buried. Despite the threats, the family pressed on, determined to uncover the truth. Then, a breakthrough came when a former colleague of the babysitter came forward with startling information. The colleague claimed to have witnessed the babysitter in a confrontation with a mysterious man shortly before her disappearance. The man was described as having a distinctive tattoo, a detail that seemed insignificant at the time but now appeared crucial. The colleague also mentioned that the babysitter had been acting strangely in the days leading up to her disappearance, as if she were being followed or watched. The investigation took a darker turn when it was revealed that the babysitter had been involved in a secretive organization that operated under the radar. The organization's activities were shrouded in mystery, and its members were known to go to great lengths to protect their identities. The babysitter's connection to this group raised more questions than answers, suggesting that her disappearance and subsequent return were not as straightforward as they seemed. As the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, the family found themselves entangled in a web of deceit and danger. The more they uncovered, the more perilous their quest for the truth became. They realized that some secrets were better left uncovered, but their desire for closure pushed them forward. With each new revelation, they came closer to understanding what had truly happened to the babysitter and why she had disappeared all those years ago. But just as they were on the verge of a breakthrough, the babysitter vanished again, leaving behind only a cryptic message that hinted at a deeper conspiracy. The message suggested that the truth was more elusive than ever, and that the family had unknowingly become part of a larger, more dangerous game. The investigation had taken them down a path they were not prepared for, and now, they were left to navigate the shadows in search of answers. The mystery of the missing babysitter had transformed from a simple case of a disappearance into a complex tale of intrigue and betrayal. The family's pursuit of the truth had led them into a labyrinth of secrets, where every answer seemed to raise more questions. As they stood at the crossroads of revelation and danger, they realized that the journey ahead would be fraught with challenges. But one thing was certain: they would not stop until they uncovered the full story, no matter where it led. Just when it seemed like the mystery couldn't get any deeper, a second thread began to unravel, one that no one saw coming, and it shook everything they thought they knew. A few weeks after the babysitter's second vanishing, another unexpected figure stepped into the spotlight. Melissa Ward, the now-grown woman who had once been the little girl left behind on that day of disappearance, received a message of her own. It wasn't a phone call, not even a letter. It was a small, unmarked package left on the doorstep of her apartment in Denver. No return address, no postage, just a plain brown box wrapped in twine. Inside was a single item, an old Polaroid, faded at the corners, showing her as a child no older than 6, sitting beside the babysitter on a park bench. Behind them in the photo stood a shadowy figure, partially obscured by trees, but clearly watching them. On the back of the photo, in handwriting that didn't match anything in her possession, were just 5 chilling words: "You're closer than you think." Melissa's heart pounded as she stared at the photo, her mind racing back to that day in the park. She remembered the swing set, the way the babysitter braided her hair, even the ice cream cone she dropped. But the man in the background? She had no memory of him. The photo didn't just raise questions, it shattered the fragile understanding she had built over the last few weeks. Why had this photo surfaced now? Who sent it? And more importantly, who was the man watching them all those years ago? She immediately shared the image with her family and the private investigator they had recently hired, but within hours of turning it over for analysis, the photo disappeared. Not misplaced, not accidentally lost, vanished. No one could explain how or why. Security footage from the Pi's office was mysteriously corrupted, a digital blur that conveniently began just minutes before the box was opened and ended right after the envelope was taken for scanning. This wasn't just unsettling, it was calculated. Someone was not only watching them, but actively interfering with their efforts to get to the truth. The reappearance of the babysitter was no longer an isolated mystery. It was now part of something broader, more organized, and likely much more dangerous. And just when they began to think things couldn't get any more confusing, an old neighbor from their childhood neighborhood came forward, revealing that in the months before the babysitter vanished, there had been strange activity on their block, people parked in cars late at night, unfamiliar men asking odd questions about the family, especially about Melissa's father, who had once worked as a defense contractor in a government lab outside of town. Up to that point, the family had never considered his past relevant. But now, with the new lead, they were forced to question whether the babysitter's disappearance had less to do with her and more to do with something or someone connected to Melissa's family itself. The theory began to surface that the babysitter may not have left for her own protection, but possibly to protect Melissa or her family. But if that was true, why reappear now? Why leave behind only confusion and cryptic clues, instead of coming clean? And most puzzling of all, why disappear again just as the truth began to inch closer? Melissa began to question everyone around her. The PI, who had been so eager to help, was now dodging her calls and claiming the case had gotten too complicated. One of her father's old friends, an engineer he had worked with, reached out, claiming he had vital information, but never showed up to their scheduled meeting. Days later, news broke that he had died in what was reported as a freak hiking accident, though the details were thin and contradictory. The family's lawyer, who had remained neutral throughout, began urging them to let it go and not stir up trouble. Everywhere Melissa turned, doors were closing, evidence was disappearing, and people were backing away like they were afraid to get caught in something far more sinister than a missing person case. What started as a personal family mystery now smelled of something bigger, maybe even a conspiracy. Were they digging too deep into something that was never meant to be uncovered? Or had the babysitter stumbled onto something back then, something dangerous, and the people involved were only now trying to bury it for good? As new doubts crept in and allies grew scarce, Melissa found herself in the center of a puzzle where every piece seemed to fit in multiple ways and none of them offered a clear picture. She kept going, driven not just by curiosity but by a gut feeling that this was bigger than she realized. And just when she thought she had reached her limit, something else appeared, something that would upend the entire direction of her investigation and force her to reconsider everything she thought she knew about that one summer day 25 years ago. It was just after sunset when Melissa first noticed the silver sedan. It had been trailing her on the drive home from her mother's house, just a few blocks behind, never close enough to be obvious, but always there at every turn. At first, she told herself it was coincidence. Denver streets weren't hard to overlap in, and she hadn't exactly taken the most direct route. But when she pulled into her parking garage and the car didn't pass by, didn't continue down the road like any normal driver would, her stomach sank. The vehicle remained parked across the street for almost 30 minutes, its engine still running. Melissa watched from her living room window, the blinds slightly cracked, her heartbeat pounding louder than the hum of the refrigerator. Finally, the car drove off. She didn't sleep that night. The next morning, she woke to find her apartment door slightly ajar. Nothing was missing. Nothing was broken. There was no sign of forced entry. But she knew, without question, that someone had been inside. Her laptop was warm. Her desk drawer was left open, even though she had closed it before bed. And the Polaroid photo? The only copy she'd had left after the original disappeared, it was gone. That was the moment Melissa understood this wasn't just about secrets or family drama anymore. This was about control. Intimidation. And whoever was behind it had just made their first real move. Her world, once grounded in questions and fading memories, had now crossed into something far more dangerous. She called the police, but they took the report like it was any other minor break-in. No signs of theft, no surveillance footage from the hallway cams, no reason, legally, anyway, to escalate the case. Melissa could see the officer's eyes as he closed his notebook. He didn't believe her. To him, she was just another anxious adult who maybe left the door open without realizing it. But she knew. And that knowledge settled into her chest like a stone, pressing against her every breath. Days later, the weight became unbearable. She hadn't heard from Jordan, her best friend since high school and the only person she had confided in since the second disappearance of the babysitter. They had been texting daily, talking late into the night about the strange twists in the case and all the things that didn't add up. But suddenly, Jordan's messages stopped. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Social media accounts were deleted overnight. And when Melissa drove to her house, the blinds were drawn, and a for sale sign had been hammered into the lawn. There was no warning, no explanation. She asked the neighbors, but none of them knew anything, just that a moving truck had come in the middle of the night, and by morning, the house was empty. It was that night Melissa cried for the first time in years, not just out of fear, but because the foundation of everything she had believed was now shifting beneath her feet. She wasn't sure who to trust anymore. People were disappearing, evidence was vanishing, and the closer she got to the truth, the more the danger circled around her. Her thoughts became a blur of doubt and dread. What had the babysitter known that was so important? Why now, after all these years? And what if this wasn't just about her family's past, but something ongoing, something that powerful people were still desperate to keep buried? Every creak in her apartment felt like a threat. Every unfamiliar face on the sidewalk made her wonder if she was being watched. Even her own memories began to betray her. She started questioning everything. Had she really remembered the man in the Polaroid from the park, or was that image planted, manipulated to guide her in a certain direction? Was the babysitter's sudden reappearance truly accidental, or had she been sent back to stir things up for reasons Melissa hadn't begun to understand? And then, just as she was starting to piece together the last conversation she had with Jordan, replaying it over and over, trying to hear what she might have missed, she discovered something chilling. On the back of her bathroom mirror, scrawled in the condensation from the shower, were the same 5 words from the Polaroid. "You're closer than you think." Only this time, they weren't written in pen or marker. They had been traced with a finger on the inside. Melissa stood frozen, trembling as she stared at the words fading slowly into the glass, her reflection warping behind them. Someone had been there, inches from her face, close enough to reach out, close enough to write a message that only she was meant to see. Her fear was no longer vague or distant, it was present, real, and suffocating. The mystery that began with a disappearance had now evolved into something far more threatening, far more personal. And the deeper she went, the more Melissa realized this wasn't about uncovering the past. It was about surviving what was coming next. Melissa wasn't prepared for what she would find tucked away in the forgotten crawlspace of her childhood home. It was late on a Sunday afternoon, and she had returned to her mother's house not to dig up the past, but to escape from it. The recent events, being followed, the break-in, Jordan's disappearance, had all taken their toll. Her mother, sensing something deeper was unraveling, had urged her to take a few days to regroup. But even in the quiet of her childhood bedroom, with its faded wallpaper and dusty shelves, Melissa couldn't escape the gnawing feeling that she was missing something. That a crucial part of the puzzle was hiding in plain sight. It wasn't until she was helping her mother store some old boxes that she noticed the corner of a weathered leather binder wedged behind a loose panel of the attic flooring. It was buried beneath insulation, wrapped in an old dish towel, and sealed with duct tape. Her hands shook as she pulled it free. Inside was a collection of handwritten letters, newspaper clippings, and medical documents, all dated nearly 3 decades ago. At first glance, it appeared to be random notes about a neurological research study, mentions of behavioral trials, and a series of therapy logs detailing a subject only ever referred to by initials, MW. It wasn't until Melissa read further that the truth began to dawn on her. These weren't random files. They were part of a confidential government project that had been abruptly shut down years earlier, one in which her father had played a quiet but pivotal role. And most shockingly, MW wasn't a stranger. It was her. The revelation hit like a freight train. The woman who had disappeared all those years ago, the babysitter, hadn't just been a caregiver. She had been a monitor, someone assigned to protect Melissa during a critical window in the program. According to the documents, Melissa had exhibited a rare pattern of neurological activity in early childhood, something her father had kept hidden from even the rest of their family. It appeared she had been part of a short-lived study into cognitive development, classified under a program codenamed WhisperNet, that was quietly dismantled after allegations of unauthorized testing on minors. The disappearance of the babysitter had coincided exactly with the day a whistleblower report was filed against her father's lab. And the worst part? The babysitter hadn't run away. She had gone into hiding to protect Melissa from what was coming next. Melissa's knees buckled as the pieces started falling into place. All those years, she had believed the babysitter vanished without reason. She had mourned her, missed her, blamed herself. But now, the truth was even harder to bear. The woman had stayed close, watching from afar, ensuring Melissa remained safe while living in fear of those who might want to erase what had been done. Her reappearance hadn't been random. It had been a signal. A warning. And her second disappearance? That wasn't her running, it was her being taken. Silenced. Shaken to her core, Melissa confronted her mother, demanding answers. At first, her mother denied knowing anything. But when shown the binder, her face turned pale. Slowly, she confessed that there had been rumors about her husband's work, rumors she'd ignored. She admitted that she'd been told never to ask questions, that her husband had insisted it was all for the greater good. But after he died, she had buried what little she suspected, too ashamed and too afraid to confront what might have been true. Now, as Melissa held the evidence in her hands, everything they thought they knew was upended. Her father hadn't just been a government contractor. He had been part of something dangerous, something powerful, and there were still people out there who wanted it buried for good. In the days that followed, Melissa began noticing even more strange signs: encrypted emails sent to her inbox from unknown sources, brief flickers in the lights of her apartment at precise times each night, and a voicemail message that seemed to play backwards before abruptly cutting off. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was real. Someone was watching. Someone who knew she had the binder. And just when she thought it couldn't get worse, she received a package addressed in the babysitter's handwriting, a single flash drive marked only with the initials WN. Her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't told anyone about the WhisperNet files. Not even her mother. Whoever sent that drive knew everything. And now, so did she. But the moment she plugged it in, the screen went black, and a video began to play. And in that moment, everything she believed about her childhood, her family, and the mystery she thought she was solving changed forever. The flash drive took a moment to load, but when it did, Melissa's stomach dropped. The grainy video that flickered onto her screen showed a surveillance feed, old footage, time-stamped from nearly 25 years ago. The angle was high, like it had been mounted in the corner of a room, and at first the setting was hard to make out. But then she saw it, a playroom. Her playroom. The rug with cartoon animals, the wooden blocks, the beanbag chair in the corner, unchanged from what she remembered as a child. But what twisted her gut was the audio that accompanied the footage. The clip showed her, as a little girl, sitting cross-legged on the floor, speaking into the air with no one else present in the frame. Her voice was soft, curious, but what she said chilled Melissa to the bone. "He says not to trust Daddy," the child version of her whispered. "He says they're going to take her away soon, but I shouldn't cry, because it's safer that way." Melissa stared at the screen, frozen, as a much younger version of herself continued murmuring things no child should have known, phrases about data points, neural sync, and names she'd never heard before. It wasn't just creepy, it was incriminating. This footage, this drive, someone had kept it hidden for decades. And now they wanted her to see it. Why now? Who had been recording her? And why had her own father allowed it to happen? That night, she drove across town to confront the only person who might still have answers, her Uncle Reed, her father's younger brother and once a close confidant in the family. He had kept his distance since her father's funeral and had rarely spoken about the research or the lab. Melissa had always assumed it was because of grief or guilt, but now she wasn't so sure. She found him sitting alone in his workshop behind his house, the walls still cluttered with old tech equipment and soldering irons. She didn't waste time. She told him everything, the flash drive, the binder, the babysitter's disappearance, the surveillance footage. And he didn't deny any of it. Reed listened silently, his face drawn tight, until she demanded answers. "Did you know?" she asked. "Did you know what he was doing to me? Did you know they were watching us like lab rats?" His reply came slowly, but it was the last thing she expected. "Your father didn't want to hurt you," he said, eyes locked on hers. "He believed you were different. Special. That the data could help people. But when the project got out of hand, when they realized what you could do, he had to make a choice. And so did I. And now she was being told to walk away. But she couldn't. Not anymore. Not after everything she'd lost. Not with the babysitter missing again. Not with Jordan gone. She left Reed's house feeling like a fugitive in her own life, her heart pounding with the weight of impossible choices. The next few days passed in a blur, each one feeling heavier than the last. Melissa was no longer sleeping. She was barely eating. Each knock on her door sent her into a panic. Each unfamiliar face she passed on the street made her heart race. And still, the calls came, each one more chilling than the last. The warning had been clear: stop looking. Stop digging. But how could she? She had seen the footage. She had heard the words her younger self had spoken in that recording, words that no child could have known. This wasn't just about her, it was about everything. It was about a web of lies and secrecy, a network of people who had manipulated not only her life, but countless others. And there was no escaping it now. Her mind raced as she replayed every conversation, every interaction, every clue. She couldn't stop now, not when she was this close to understanding it all. She had to push forward. She had to find out why she had been chosen for this experiment, what her father had really been involved in, and how deep the conspiracy ran. But then, just when she thought she was inching closer to the truth, the betrayal came. It started with a message from someone she thought she could trust. Her private investigator, Tom, the one who had been helping her piece everything together, finally reached out after days of silence. The message was brief: "Meet me at the old diner. We need to talk. Trust no one." It was strange. Tom had always been professional, always straight to the point, but something in his tone felt off, almost like he was pleading with her without saying the words. Melissa didn't hesitate. She went. The diner was a dusty relic of another time, tucked away on the outskirts of town. The kind of place that still had vinyl booths and an old jukebox in the corner. It was empty, save for a lone waitress who looked up briefly when Melissa entered before returning to wiping down the counter. She spotted Tom at a corner booth, but as she approached, something was wrong. His eyes were wide, nervous. His hands were shaking slightly as he fumbled with a napkin, not looking her in the eye. "Melissa, he started, his voice low, almost regretful. "I didn't want you to find out this way." She sat down across from him, her heart pounding in her chest. She had learned not to trust anyone easily, not since everything started unraveling. "What's going on, Tom?" she asked, her voice tight with suspicion. "What aren't you telling me?" He hesitated, his gaze darting around the room as if he was waiting for someone. I've been working with them all along," he confessed, his words hanging heavily in the air. "I was sent to watch you, Melissa. I was hired to guide you, to keep you on track, to make sure you didn't uncover too much. But somewhere along the way, his voice cracked, and for a split second, there was something in his eyes that looked like guilt. I didn't realize how deep you were getting into this. I didn't realize how much danger you were really in. Now they want you to stop. They want you to stay out of it for good. And if you don't, I can't protect you anymore." Melissa's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "So everything I've trusted you with has been a lie." Her voice wavered, the weight of betrayal settling in like an anchor in her chest. "You've been lying to me from the start." Tom nodded, looking down at his hands in shame. "I never wanted it to go this far, but I didn't have a choice. You've got people watching you, Melissa, people much bigger and more dangerous than anything you can imagine. They know everything about you. They've been tracking your every move, and now they're watching me, too. If I don't do what they say, they'll." Before he could finish, the door of the diner swung open with a sudden force, and a group of men in dark suits entered. Their presence was imposing, their eyes scanning the room as if searching for someone. They didn't even look at Tom or Melissa directly, but their footsteps were deliberate, like they already knew exactly where to find her. Melissa's heart raced. This was it. This was the moment she'd been dreading. Tom's betrayal had confirmed it, she had crossed a line, and now there were consequences. The men made their way toward her, and without a word, one of them grabbed her arm, pulling her to her feet. Tom's voice trembled as he reached out, his hand raised as if to stop them. "Don't do this," he pleaded. "She's just a part of it, she doesn't know." But the man who had grabbed her arm turned to Tom, his expression cold and unflinching. "She knows too much. You failed your assignment." The words hung in the air like a threat. Melissa felt the blood drain from her face. She was in deep, too deep to turn back now. The danger wasn't just looming, it was here. They were taking her, and if she didn't act fast, she wouldn't make it out of that diner alive. With a burst of adrenaline, Melissa yanked her arm free and bolted toward the door, ignoring the sharp pain in her side as she ran. Behind her, she could hear the men following, their footsteps pounding the floor. She didn't look back. She couldn't. She pushed through the back door of the diner and into the alley, her breath ragged as she ran. Every nerve in her body screamed that she was being hunted, that they wouldn't stop until they had her. She had no plan. No idea where to go. But she couldn't stop. Not now. The truth was closer than ever, but now it was costing her everything. She was running from more than just her past. She was running from a conspiracy that reached further than she had ever imagined. And with each passing second, the stakes grew higher. She had crossed a line that she couldn't uncross, and now the world was closing in on her. Melissa's lungs burned as she sprinted down the dark alley, the echo of heavy footsteps closing in behind her. She could hear the men shouting, their voices muffled by the adrenaline pulsing in her veins. Every instinct screamed at her to keep running, to not stop, but her body was betraying her. She stumbled, her legs aching, but she pushed through, knowing that the moment she slowed down, they would catch her. She reached the end of the alley and darted into the street, her eyes frantically scanning for some way out. But there was nothing. No car. No hiding place. Just a street lined with silent buildings, the city's lights flickering in the distance, offering no comfort. She felt them close in, saw the shadows of their figures on the pavement. It was only a matter of seconds before they would have her, drag her back into the darkness from where she had come. But then, as if guided by some unseen force, her eyes caught sight of a van parked at the curb. A nondescript, white van, its engine still running. A faint hope flared in her chest. She didn't know who was inside, but it was her only chance. Without thinking, She veered toward it, throwing open the side door and diving in just as the men rounded the corner. Her heart hammered in her chest, and for a moment, she thought she might collapse from the sheer panic of it all. But then the door slammed shut behind her, and she heard the engine rev. She barely had time to register what was happening before the van sped off, taking a sharp turn and swerving down another alley, out of the reach of the men who were now shouting in frustration behind her. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she looked at the person behind the wheel, a woman with short, dark hair and a face that seemed both unfamiliar and strangely comforting. "You're not safe," the woman said without looking at her. "But I'm your only chance. They've been watching you, tracking your every move. You need to trust me if you want to make it out of this alive." Melissa opened her mouth to speak, to ask who she was, but the words stuck in her throat. Her mind was still reeling, too many questions, too many twists. She had thought she was close to the truth, but now everything felt like it was slipping through her fingers. Who was this woman? Was she another part of the conspiracy, or was she someone who could actually help? The woman's gaze flickered to her briefly. "I know you have questions. But right now, you need to listen. There's only one way to stop this, one person you need to confront. And I can take you there, but you have to understand, once you know the truth, there's no going back. Are you ready for that?" Melissa didn't hesitate. There was no turning back now, anyway. She had already crossed the line. She nodded, her throat tight. The woman gave a quick nod of her own and turned the van onto a quieter street. They didn't speak again as they drove through the city, weaving in and out of traffic, until finally they reached an abandoned building on the outskirts of town. The van came to a screeching halt, and the woman killed the engine. "We're here," she said, her voice grim. "Inside, you'll find the answers. But there's something you need to know first." She turned to Melissa with a look that made her stomach churn. "I wasn't sent to help you. I was sent to stop you. I was told to keep you from finding out what's in that building." For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Melissa felt her heart lurch as everything she thought she knew, the allies, the clues, the people she had trusted, started to unravel. "You," she whispered, the betrayal hitting her harder than anything she'd felt before. "I know you're angry," the woman said quietly. "But the truth is, you were never meant to uncover any of this. Your father, the project, it was all meant to be buried forever. And you, everything about you, was a result of that experiment. You weren't just an innocent subject. You were the key to everything they were trying to unlock. And now that you've started digging, you've put yourself in their sights." Melissa's world tilted on its axis. She had always suspected there was more to her father's work than he had let on, but this was beyond anything she could have imagined. She wasn't just a witness. She wasn't even a victim. She had been a product, a carefully crafted tool in a much larger machine. And the woman in front of her? She had been part of the mechanism designed to ensure the truth stayed buried. The woman reached into her jacket, pulling out a small, metallic object that glinted in the moonlight. "This is your father's final message," she said, holding it out to Melissa. "If you want to stop them, you'll need to use it." Melissa's hand shook as she took the device, her mind racing. This was it. The final piece. She had come this far, and now, she was closer to the truth than ever before. But the weight of what was about to happen, what she was about to uncover, pressed on her like a ton of bricks. "Why are you giving this to me?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Because," the woman replied, her voice barely above a whisper, "I didn't have a choice. I was part of it all, too. But when I saw what was happening to you, I couldn't keep lying anymore. I couldn't be a part of it. You're the only one who can stop this now." As the words settled in, Melissa's thoughts raced. She felt like she was standing at the edge of a precipice, the truth just beyond reach, and yet, it felt like it was about to swallow her whole. The weight of the device in her hand was a reminder of everything she had fought for and everything she had lost. Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed from behind. A group of men appeared, emerging from the shadows like ghosts, their faces masked, their intentions clear. "You've made a big mistake, Melissa," one of them said, stepping forward, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "The truth is not yours to uncover. It never was." With a final, Sickening realization, Melissa understood. The game was never about the babysitter. It was never about the research. It was about her, the key to everything. They weren't after her father. They were after her. And now, they were going to make sure she disappeared, just like the rest. But Melissa wasn't done yet. With a surge of adrenaline, she ran toward the building, holding the device close, the last piece of the puzzle in her hands. She wasn't going to let them win. She couldn't. Not after everything. The final confrontation was here. The final twist, the one she hadn't seen coming, was only the beginning of what would happen next. And as she crossed the threshold of the building, she realized one thing. The truth was more dangerous than she had ever imagined, and the real fight had just begun. As Melissa stepped into the building, the air felt thick with the weight of everything she had uncovered, the years of secrets finally beginning to crumble around her. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears as she moved deeper into the abandoned structure, each footstep echoing off the cold, concrete walls. The device she clutched in her hand felt heavier than it should have been, and as she walked further, the pieces of the puzzle she had fought so hard to put together began to fall into place. She was on the precipice of everything, her past, her father's legacy, and a truth that had the power to destroy everything. The men who had followed her were closing in, but she was no longer running from them. This time, she was ready to face them. Ready to confront the people who had spent years shaping her life, manipulating her every move. The building was eerily silent except for the hum of distant machinery, and as she rounded the corner, she saw a figure standing in the center of the room, bathed in the soft glow of an overhead light. It was the man who had been behind everything, the orchestrator of her father's experiments, the mastermind of the conspiracy that had controlled her life for so long. He looked at her with a cold, calculating gaze, as if he had been waiting for this moment, as if he knew she would come for him eventually. He wasn't surprised. Not in the least. And that realization hit Melissa like a punch to the gut. Everything, every choice she had made, every action she had taken to uncover the truth, it had all been part of the plan. He had known she would come here. He had known she would find the answers. "Melissa," he said, his voice smooth and unsettlingly calm. "You've done well to get this far, but you still don't understand. You've always been part of the equation, always been the key. Your father's work, everything we built together, it was meant for someone like you. Someone who could see beyond the surface. Someone who could carry it all forward. You were never supposed to find out, but here you are. And now you're faced with a choice." Melissa stood frozen, the device still clutched tightly in her hand. She felt a surge of anger, the culmination of everything she had learned rushing through her veins. "You used me," she spat, her voice trembling with fury. "You manipulated me. My father's work, everything, it was all a lie." The man's smile was thin, almost pitying. "No, Melissa. It was never a lie. It was always about potential, about creating something better, something more than human. Your father understood that, and now, so do you. You were always meant to be the one to lead it. This," he gestured to the machinery surrounding them, "this is just the beginning. You can either embrace it, take your place at the top, or you can walk away. But make no mistake, there's no turning back once you know what's at stake. This is bigger than you, bigger than your father, bigger than all of us." Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to make sense of what he was saying. The idea that her father had been part of this twisted vision, that she had been a tool in this grand experiment, was enough to make her want to scream. But she couldn't. She had to think. She had to make the right decision. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore, she was fighting for everything her father had been, everything that had been stolen from her. "You think I'll join you?" Melissa asked, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside her. "You think I'll help you destroy everything I've fought to uncover? Everything my father died for?" The man's eyes hardened, and for a moment, Melissa saw something flicker behind them, something close to desperation. "You don't understand, do you? You were never meant to be a victim, Melissa. You were meant to be the savior. Your father's research wasn't just about control, it was about evolution. Humanity isn't ready for what we can do. But you have the power to shape what comes next. You don't have to destroy it. You can be the one to lead it." Melissa felt the weight of his words settle in the pit of her stomach, but she couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that had been gnawing at her from the very beginning. She had spent too long running from the truth, too long buried in the lies of her past. The pieces were all there, the final puzzle coming together in her mind. She couldn't let this man, this monster, control her fate. She had to take control. Without warning, she hurled the device onto the ground, shattering it into pieces. The machinery surrounding them whirred to life, a low hum filling the air as the lights flickered above. The man's eyes widened in shock, and for the first time, Melissa saw a crack in his perfect facade. He began, but the words died in his throat as the room's systems began to malfunction, the security cameras short-circuiting and the screens flickering wildly. "I'm not your puppet," Melissa said, her voice ringing with finality. "I'm not a part of your experiment. I'm not going to be the person you want me to be." She turned and walked toward the exit, the building now trembling under the weight of its own collapse. The man didn't chase her. He didn't have to. He knew that the real battle was over. She had won, not because she had exposed everything, but because she had refused to be controlled. She had chosen her own path. As she stepped out into the cold night, the distant sound of sirens pierced the silence. She had no idea what would come next, but for the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel before: hope. Hope that the world didn't have to be defined by the past. Hope that she could rebuild her life, free from the chains of the conspiracy that had once bound her. But as she walked away, her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her phone buzzing in her pocket. She hesitated for only a moment before pulling it out, her hands trembling as she saw the message on the screen: "We're not done yet." Her breath caught in her throat as the weight of what was still to come hit her all at once. The mystery wasn't over. It never was. And as the screen flickered, she realized with a cold rush of fear that the world she had just escaped was only the beginning. There was something much darker still lurking in the shadows, waiting for her. The fight wasn't over. And in that moment, Melissa knew, she would never truly be free. Later that evening, she received a call from an unknown number. A distorted voice came through the line, calm and measured. "You have 1 week to return what you've taken," it said. "This is your only warning. After that, we won't be so polite." Then the line went dead. Melissa stood there in silence, the phone pressed to her ear long after the call had ended. This was no longer a story about finding the babysitter. This was about survival. Hers. And possibly others. She was being forced to choose between her own safety and the truth, a truth that had already destroyed lives, and now threatened to destroy hers. Every part of her screamed to run, to leave town, to disappear and never look back. But another part, the one driven by every lie she'd uncovered, refused to be silenced. Something was happening that went far deeper than she'd imagined, and now that she'd cracked it open, there was no going back. But the danger wasn't just closing in, it was already here. And she knew, deep down, that if she didn't make the right move soon, she might vanish just like the babysitter. Without a trace.